Hello, welcome to another Classic View from the Boundary from Test Match Special, our series celebrating 40 years of interviews with stars from all sorts of backgrounds who all share a love of cricket. Well, this episode is one of the real greats and comes from 1987. Sir Christopher Lee was, without question, one of the true titans of British cinema. In a career that spanned the whole second half of the 20th century and then well into the 21st, Lee's remembered for his performances in over 200 major films, notably as Dracula in the Hammer horror series, as well as in James Bond, The Wicker Man and the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Well, during a horribly rain-affected match against Pakistan that saw just one innings, Sir Christopher came to the old commentary box at Lord's above the pavilion and took a seat next to Brian Johnston. Stand by for an enchanting half an hour.
Welcome back to Lord's, where our visitor today was once described as tall, dark and gruesome, which is a rather unfair description of Christopher Lee, famous unfairly again, I think, for his parts in horror films, but is a very fine actor, and he's certainly tall, he's certainly dark, but there's no sign of any gruesome. Very nice to see you, Christopher.
Thank you, Brian. It's
And
great
you're
to be
immaculately
here.
dressed, your IZ tie on and all that.
That's in memory of happier days, of better days of cricket, I can assure you.
Just bring us up to date with your cricket yourself. I mean, when did you play at school? You were at school of Wellington.
Yes, I started to learn cricket at my prep school, which was Summerfield's.
Oh, yes, at Oxford.
At Oxford, yes,
Yeah.
indeed. And I think that's where I was taught to play. Unfortunately, the bursar, as I think they were called in those days, of Summerfield's, who was a very good bowler, Mr. Botel, I remember him vividly, was an extremely good bowler. But he had a rather strange action, which unfortunately, as one does at a very early age, I then proceeded to copy. And it's an action which was shared by Mike Proctor and Max Walker. In other words, it was rather like a windmill, and I bowled off the wrong foot, swinging my arms over twice.
But you're 6 foot something.
6 foot 4. So when I
4.
got going, and I did open the bowling at my public school as well on occasions, when I got going, if I kept any kind of length, they used to come up fairly high off the pitch, and I was fairly quick.
The Demon Lee.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So you played for Wellington?
I, on occasions, did, yes. And the highest score I ever had in my life was while I was at Wellington, but not playing for the college. I had 149 not out, and came into the pavilion and burst into tears because I didn't make 150.
Marvellous, isn't it? And did you keep it up after school or not? Or...
No, there was a little thing called World War II, which inconveniently intervened in 1939. I'd just left school about a year before. I was what was called, I suppose, in those days, a promising cricketer. I went in about 4 or 5 and fancied myself a lot, of course. You know, everybody used to say, what marvellous style when they saw me in the nets. Superb elegance of stroke play. It was very different when I got in the middle.
Well, it
I was
often is,
so
isn't it?
concerned with making these magnificent-looking shots that I seldom scored enough runs.
And Royal Air Force, you couldn't fit in a plane. You're too big.
Oh, no, I have been known to do that.
Yeah.
I have been known to do that. Actually,
What were you in?
my cricketing career did continue during the war to a very minor degree. In fact, I suppose the greatest moment of my whole life in the game of cricket was when my squadron, 260 Squadron in the Desert Air Force, had a game of cricket against, I think it was one of the other squadrons on the wing, in fact it must have been, playing on a rather bizarre pitch, to put it mildly. That's to say, in the desert, which had been flattened and rolled and had some matting put down, and I took 9 wickets.
I think you're lethal.
Oh, well, I didn't know what the ball was
sand.
going to do any more than anybody else.
The batsman didn't.
But it was the only game that I can remember during the war. After the war, I still continued to play, and played again about 1947, 48, 49, 50, when I virtually stopped playing. I, of course, have never given up my love for the game, and I watch it as often as I can all over the world.
Yes, what about watching? Go right back to when you... What was your first big match? Do you remember the first one you saw?
I think I can. It's very difficult because it's a long time ago. It's at least 55 years ago, I hate to tell you, but it is. And it was while I was at my prep school, and we watched a match played at Oxford. And I'm absolutely certain that Jack Hobbs was batting.
Marvellous.
Now,
You're
whether
lucky to
I'm
see
right
him.
or not, I can't clearly recall, but I do know that I saw Jack Hobbs bat, and many of his great contemporaries. It might have been Surrey against Oxford or something of that kind. And I certainly, of course, remember the pre-war Australian teams vividly. I remember Bradman as if he was walking out in front of me now. The one thing I remember about him, and of course naturally after the war as well, the one thing I remember about Bradman was the first time I ever saw him hit the ball. And that was his famous pull shot to the boundary from outside the off stump. I'd never seen a shot played like that. When I attempted to replace it, of course, with an equally, perhaps even a better shot, I was sternly ordered by the games master not to try such rubbish, but to keep a straight bat.
I know, it's rotten, and his used to go right down to sort of log on there.
Like with the speed of light.
Yeah, he was very quick to get in position, wasn't he?
Most wonderful footwork of any batsman I've ever seen.
Well, the other great player in that time I was lucky enough to see too was Wally Hammond. Did you see him?
Oh, yes, many times. Many times. I met him several times. Actually, I had a very great friend, a very dear friend, Bev Lyon, who was captain of Gloucestershire at one time. And he and Hammond, of course, used to play together. And he told me a wonderful story once about the Gloucester scorecard. In fact, this used to happen regularly throughout every season. Frequently, when Charlie Parker was bowling, the scorecard would read, caught Lyon, bowled Parker, many times, because Bev used to field at second slip and Wally Hammond at first. Well, as everybody who knows anything about cricket knows, Wally Hammond was one of the great slip fielders of all time. He was so fast that he took the ball and literally flicked it out of the back of his hand to Bev, who threw it up in the air, and so it always went down as caught Lyon, bowled Parker.
Because, I mean, your acting took over, did it really? I mean, as soon as you left, did you start straight away after leaving school?
No, not at all. No, I left school in 38, and in 39 I went into various strange parts of the world. And then
had you done any acting before the war?
No, never.
Never?
In 41, well, school play. You know, when I was at Summerfields, I was in 3 plays, I think. The other actor who was with me and is still very much alive, a contemporary of mine, is now an American citizen and lives in Palm Springs, Patrick McNee.
Oh, yeah.
And he played Brutus, and I played Cassius, and Julius Caesar. Then he played Bolingbroke, and I played Mowbray and Richard II. And
he went on to Eton, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
He
yes.
was Eton in his
And he's still a follower of cricket. But no, my cricketing career came to an end, really, with the outbreak of the war, and then I tried to take it up, but only just at weekends for fun after the war, from 46 onwards. Played a bit for the next 2 or 3 years. Played in a marvellous place at Birkenhead, I remember, the Bowler Hat Club.
I don't know that.
Oh, yes, I played for a team that Trevor Howard got together, all stage and screen people, against... must have been a Lancashire team, because Ken Cranston was the captain and Jack Aiken was playing, and various other people. I'll never forget the expression on Trevor's face when I said boldly, "I will open the bowling," charged towards the crease, and with this rather strange bowling action, as my first arm went over, my first arm movement went over, I caught my hand on my right hip, and as my second arm went over, so to speak, there was nothing in the hand, and the batsman looked wildly round.
Just a twirling arm?
Just a twirling arm. He didn't know what had happened to the ball, nor did anybody, until it was retrieved from the boundary behind me. There was a moment of great shame.
Oh, awful. What, you slung it back?
It went straight back towards the boundary behind me.
Not
and
sure
Trevor's
that counts.
face
Nothing,
was
it? No,
a study.
That would have been a dead ball, I suppose.
I suppose so. Trevor's face, I think, would have preferred perhaps a dead bowler.
Trevor used to play a bit for me. He was a jolly good cricketer.
Oh, yes, and of course fanatically involved in the game, and I'm sure he's watching. Well, there's nothing to watch, alas, at the moment.
Lassie doesn't come up here so often. He used to be regularly up here, you know. And
yes, I used to meet him
special
here
clause
quite
in his
often.
contract, he couldn't film during the Lord's Test match.
There was, I believe, a similar clause in the contract of Boris Karloff, who was a tremendously keen cricketer and played for the famous Aubrey Smith team in Hollywood many years ago before the war. And indeed, Aubrey Smith's contract, too, that if they came and worked in this country, they would, under no circumstances, be expected to work during the Lord's Test. There's a marvellous story about Aubrey Smith, who was known as Round the Corner Smith, because he used to appear from behind the umpire. He was a very good player. And I believe captained a touring MCC team.
Captained England in South Africa.
In South Africa, that's right. Well, he apparently was sitting just below us, watching some game going on out in the middle. I don't know what it was. And predictably, of course, he was snorting through his moustache and saying, "Oh, good God, take him off. God, oh, my God. What a player. Look at that field placing," the usual sort of remarks. He was then at the height of his fame as an actor, had been knighted and had played the Duke of Wellington, and everything you can think of was in every British film or British subject made in Hollywood in those days, and everyone in the world knew him. Apparently 2 rather elderly members were listening to this tirade that was going on, and were getting a little bit disgruntled about it, and one of them finally turned to the other and he said, "Who's that fellow over there making all that noise?" And the other man looked over and he said, "Oh, yes," he said, "there's a fellow called Smith, who used to play for Sussex."
Lovely, isn't it? And of course, Boris Karloff used to be a regular at the Oval at all the Test matches. He was a member of Surrey, wasn't he?
Yes, he also used to come here a lot. In fact, I've watched matches with him here. And he played for Uppingham when he was at school there.
Just remind us what his real name was.
William Henry Pratt.
William Henry. Very advisable to change that.
Well, I suppose so, yes. Well, I've never found out, and I don't think anyone has ever found out, where Karloff came from. Boris always said it was in the family somewhere, but we've never really known. I remember asking his widow, Evie Karloff, who was still very much alive, I remember saying to her, "Are you Boris's fifth wife?" She said, "As far as I know," because he was certainly married 5 times and possibly more. Yes. And there's a shroud of mystery hangs over that, very appropriate.
He looked very distinguished, though, didn't he?
He was a wonderful man.
So can we stick to Hollywood, remember? And you were there, I mean, you lived there for 10 years and you've come back now. Was there any cricket going on nowadays?
Oh, yes, quite a bit, as a matter of fact. A lot of people, you see, there's a lot of West Indians there, quite a lot of Pakistanis and people from countries that play cricket, like Fiji and various other places in the Pacific. And there's quite a lot of teams out there, and they play regularly on Saturdays and Sundays. I had a rather incredible experience, really, because I hadn't played cricket for well over 30 years. And Norman Gifford, I forget exactly when, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, brought a team out. They were touring around the world. And I found myself playing on matting in the Rose Bowl at Pasadena, which, of course, normally is used for football matches. And it was a wonderful experience for me to be out there again with a bat in my hand. The years rolled back up to a point. And the team was a very remarkable one because, apart from Norman Gifford, he had Glenn Turner, he had Graham Gooch, he had David Gower, he had Ian Botham.
No, not a bad as side.
Not bad, Jeff Miller and various others, and it was great fun. And I was very grateful to Mr. Barlow because he kept on bowling me long hops on the leg stump. And even the Americans, with their baseball swings, could score off those from time to time.
So you were among the runs, were you, that day?
Yes, I made a few runs, believe it or not. I remember trying to execute a late cut.
But when Aubrey Smith played, was there a club, or what sort of ground did they play on?
They played on a ground in a place called Griffith Park, which still exists. I don't think there's a cricket pitch there anymore. There might be, but I don't think so. I don't think they had any specific name as a team, but of course he was the captain, and a very unforgiving one too.
Was he actually very tough?
He made everybody jump.
He looked terribly fierce, didn't he?
Oh yes.
And
David Niven, Basil Rathbone, Nigel Bruce, Willie Bruce, always used to, I think he kept wicket, but he always used to play golf in a brown felt hat. He refused flatly to play in anything else. Apart from his pads and his boots and his trousers and his shirt, of course. But he always wore a brown felt hat. And if you look closely at the pictures of those days, you will see that brown hat either on the ground or in his lap. Wouldn't be parted from it.
There were 1 or 2 people who wore brown felt hat. The T.C. Lowry of Somerset used to wear one.
Really?
And he kept wicket, yes.
Really?
A brown felt hat.
When was that?
Oh, way back. This is 1927, 28, 29.
Oh, well, maybe Willie Bruce, Nigel Bruce borrowed the idea.
He may have done.
I remember Boris used to tell very, very funny stories about these matches because Aubrey Smith, I said, was a great dictator. Yeah. If you didn't make some runs or hold a few catches, you were shamed almost forever. In fact, his house at the top of Coldwater Canyon had an exact replica of Father Time here on the roof as a weather vane. Yeah. Oh, yes, he used to fly the NCC flag and all sorts of things. But Boris used to tell us very funny stories about Aubrey. One in particular, when he suddenly said to his field, for no particular reason, spread out, spread out. This next man coming in is a holy terror. Spread out. So the entire field spread out to the boundary. And in came a very ancient gentleman indeed, who wandered up to the wicket and waved rather feebly at the ball. And at the end of the over, somebody said to Aubrey, "Well, what was all that about, Aubrey?" And he wasn't going to let on. He said, "Well, when I remember him, he used to hit everybody all over the field." Of course, that must have been about 50 years before.
That was probably so short-sighted you didn't see any fielders at all.
Exactly. There's a chap like that who used to come down and play against Wellington when I was playing there, called Jerry Weigall.
Oh, Jerry Weigall.
Very, very famous
He used to
player.
Demonstrate with his umbrella in the long room here.
Indeed he did. He and C.B. Fry,
That's right.
both of them.
Tremendous arguments.
Well, I saw him play before the war against Wellington as an OW, as an old Wellingtonian, and he made runs, and he must have been 70 then.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I don't think they were bowling flat out at him, but I remember he was dab here and a dab there.
but I've seen him giving demonstrations in the long room, marvellous off-drives with his umbrella.
GJV Wygor.
Yes. Are you good on initials? I'm marvellous on them.
Sometimes.
Yes.
Telephone numbers too, but not names as a rule.
Just back to the Hollywood thing, did Ronald Colman play, or was it only in raffles? He bowled in raffles, do you remember? Bowled in a cap, Ronald Colman did. Did he actually play in real life?
I believe, well, I think I've seen a picture of him in flannels. As to whether he played or not, I don't know. Errol Flynn played, David Niven played, Basil Rathbone played, Bruce, Karloff, Smith, and from time to time the occasional Englishman whose name I might forget from time to time, who was, an actor out there, because there were a great many in those days, would play in these Tims on pain of instant banishment practically from California. Unfortunately, I never saw any of those matches, of course, although I was alive when they were played. I wasn't living out there. No, there's still a certain amount of cricket being played out there.
Back here now, I mean, do you ever watch cricket, or do you watch it on the telly, or do you...
Oh, yes. I always try and come here to Lord's for a test, obviously, and if possible on a Saturday or during the week if I'm free. Otherwise, I must admit, I do watch on television, and this is where the game has changed, of course, to such an immense degree since the days when I first started watching it, by literally being there on the ground, and now watching it on the box, for obvious reasons. There are great improvements. That is to say, you can see a thing in much bigger close-up. You can see the way the ball moves, which you can't necessarily see on the ground, both through the air and off the ground. You can see the batsman's footwork perhaps a little bit more clearly. You can certainly see in the replays how somebody got out and what the ball did, which you could never do in those days, of course. I think it's a great blessing to millions of people who would otherwise never be able to watch cricket at all because they wouldn't have the time or perhaps even the inclination, depending on where they lived, in going to a cricket ground.
Yes, it's changed a bit, hasn't it, actually?
Oh, yes. I mean, I was just going to say, one of the major changes in television, of course, is, I suppose, in umpiring decisions, because no umpire is 100% infallible, as everybody knows, and they make mistakes like anybody else. And, I mean, some of the decisions that were made, for instance, last winter, out in Australia, in some of those matches, were a bit bizarre, and it was quite clear in the replays that the umpire was wrong.
We were talking about that earlier this morning, that really you shouldn't show the replay because they booed the umpire.
Yes, and I think that's wrong because he's doing the best he can, and he's the only person who can really judge better than anybody else.
Then you have a second look.
Then you have a second look. The umpire's wrong quite clearly on occasions, and of course it can create a lot of bad feeling. That's the disadvantage of television.
But they probably always were. I mean, the great Frank Chester, I'm sure, made mistakes, but you didn't see. Everybody
he would never admit to one.
No,
I'm quite sure.
He was
like
great.
Alex Skelding was that, of course, the famous umpire, wasn't he? Wasn't he the one who's, when somebody said to him, Skelding, that wasn't out, he said, read tomorrow's paper. Wasn't that Alex Skelding?
Yes, there is.
I think it was.
Yes, I think he did. There was also the village umpire who said that, didn't he? As the batsman went past him and said that wasn't out, and the umpire said, well, look in Thursday's Gazette, and the batsman said, you look, I'm the editor. Which was quite
really? Oh, I hadn't heard that one.
That's an extra twist.
Marvellous.
That's an extra twist on it.
Well, that's marvellous. But they were great characters, of course, those people.
Who umpired in Hollywood, then? Did they find anybody who knew about cricket?
No idea.
I wonder.
Quite frankly, I have no idea
Perhaps
at
they did it
all.
without him. Might have got on quite well.
Maybe. I have really no idea. You were talking about the changes in the game. I think there are two major changes in the game. One, again, I'm only speaking entirely personally, and as a watcher of the game I love and have loved all my life. One is the intimidation involved.
Yeah, that's bad.
Which is now got to a peak where people's lives are in danger, as they have been for some years anyway. And the other is that I don't think, again, I could be wrong, one is always inclined to look back. I don't think there are as many players today that you could really define as great players as opposed to very fine players. Obviously, somebody like Viv Richards is a great player. Obviously, Gary Sober's a great player, and so on. And Michael Holding, a great bowler, and of course from this country too, and from all over the world. To me, the outstanding all-rounder today is Richard Hadley.
Marvellous bowler, isn't he?
Wonderful bowler.
And because he comes in at number 7 and hits
and murders the bowling, yes. But how many great, truly great players are there? Where is Bradman's successor, or indeed McCabe's?
Well, I suppose Gavaskar is a sort of Bradman successor on paper, but not the same.
On paper, certainly, in terms of his records, holds world
as an
records.
accumulator. But I think you and I were lucky to see some of the great, I mean, the Hendrons and the Hobbses and the Woodies. I may be in 10 years' time, people will say, wasn't it marvellous? We saw the Bothams, we saw the pros and all that, and how great they were, and they aren't as great today.
I was lucky enough to see the man who, to my way of thinking, was undoubtedly the greatest fast bowler I've ever seen, and I suppose in many respects some people would agree that he was the greatest of all.
You're going to say Limble?
Harold
Harold
Larwood.
Did you?
I saw him. Lindwall would certainly be rather in second
Did
place,
you see
if
Larwood?
not
You wouldn't have
almost
seen him in
equal
a
first.
test, would you? Yeah,
No,
would you see him? Yeah.
no, I never saw him in a test, but I did see him bowl, and it was quite phenomenal.
I went to see him this winter.
Oh, really?
He's blind.
In Sydney, yes, I know.
Blind,
He's
and he won't go out
85 or
because he
something.
feels embarrassed because he doesn't recognise people. But he's in lovely form, and he just talks and talks of the old days.
Of course, they love him in Australia,
Oh, yeah.
don't they? And they
That's
have done
good.
for years.
And his loyalty to Jardine and all.
Oh,
this.
yes.
Would you do it again? I said. He said only for Mr. Jardine.
Really?
Only for Mr. Jardine.
Well, that's loyalty.
Which is loyalty.
But he was a phenomenal bowler. I mean, I'd never seen anything to better the run-up, the action, the delivery, the pace, the accuracy.
Because he's shrunk now, as we all do.
Well, he was never a huge
but he
man.
was
He was very
never big.
broad-shouldered.
Yes,
Well, he was a
got
miner,
the
wasn't
minor
he?
shoulders, you see.
I think the best off-spinner I ever saw was probably Tayfield.
Towie Tayfield.
Towie Tayfield,
His
yeah.
two mid-ons. He had the mid-ons with a short
That I
mid-ons.
don't remember. But
Yes,
I remember
he's
that.
the-
I remember the tapping of the
tapping
toe
the
and
toe.
everything.
He was
Oh, yes.
very, very accurate. Didn't spin it a lot, but very accurate and difficult to get away. I remember seeing Dennis Compton play when Dennis was in his best form, and I mean, he just hit it into the off-field, and he had a very big off-field. He used to bowl well outside the off-stump, and Dennis couldn't penetrate the field at all. He was very difficult to get away.
Very accurate.
Can we abandon cricket for a moment and just talk about the acting? I mean, you've got this reputation. Did you go straight into the horror films?
No,
Or-
not
I mean,
at all.
That's
No,
why I
as a
think
matter
it's
of fact,
unfair. Do you mind being associated with horror films?
Well, yes and no. Let's put it this way. I mean, I've done them. Not as many as people think, and they were instrumental in my beginning an international career, so I can never, ever turn my back on them. Not that I wish to.
No.
I started as an actor in 1947, and one of the reasons why you refer to me as tall, dark, and gruesome is that I am tall. I'm 6'4". In the first 10 years of my career, I never got a job of any consequence because people said, "Oh, he's much too tall. You know, we can't have him towering over the leading men, not the leading ladies,
over the
leading
leading men.
men."
Oh.
Even the so-called giants of 6'2" and 3" felt smaller beside me, and also because I'm very thin, may have looked even taller. In actual fact, that's nonsense. It's because I've been in a lot of pictures, 162 to be precise, and
That's a staggering number.
it's a
isn't
rather
it?
large number. It's more than anybody alive today, a British actor anyway. And so I've had many people come up to me all over the world saying, "I didn't realize you were so tall." So that blows that theory out of the window. I started 10 years later, in 1957, by doing the first film for Hammer, which was a horror movie called The Curse of Frankenstein. Okay, since then...
What were you then? You were the creature. weren't you?
Yeah, that's right.
What-
You got it
also-
right.
well,
Amazing.
weren't you
Most people
swathed
call it
in
the monster.
bandages and things?
No,
Or
that
what?
was the mummy.
Mummy.
That was very uncomfortable.
It was in the mummy as well.
Oh, that was murder, because I had tall muscles in my neck and shoulders and everything, carrying these ladies distances of 85 yards and things like that, again and again and again, and they couldn't hold on to me because they were supposed to be unconscious. And so they were dead weights. You try that sometime,
I'd
you know,
rather
with your
not,
arms
yeah.
extended.
And what did the
uh,
creature do? I mean, you were sort of revived off a table and sparks came out of it and things.
Oh, all sorts of things put together from bits and pieces of other people, and
I mean, what was it painful or was it physically?
no, it was very unpleasant on occasions, of course, because, you know, when you've got that kind of makeup on, it can be painful. And when you're swathed in bandages, you can't move, and somebody's just walled you up and they cry out lunch, it can be even worse.
But the Dracula business, I mean, I don't know how many Dracula films. I jotted
Six
down
in 15
Satanic
years.
Rites of Dracula, Dracula Prince of Darkness, Dracula Rises from the Grave, The Taste of the Blood of Dracula. I mean,
No comment.
No comment. No.
No,
But you
no
were
comment.
always, you were killed by spears through the eyes or into the heart.
Yes, invariably.
What happened? I mean, do they? I mean,
Well, I've still got the scars to prove it, in fact. A lot of misconception about this. In fact, out of all those pictures that I've made, I've only made 15 horror movies. I played Dracula 6 times.
You were
The
too good,
Frankenstein
Zim,
thing
you see.
once.
That's what they people
well,
remember.
that's a compliment,
and you've
thank
got a
you.
delightful set of teeth now. I mean, did you ever have
All mine.
All yours. And what
Yes.
about the fangs, which we used to see? Those
Oh,
are
tiny,
falsies.
minute, barely visible in actual fact, but people used to get distorted ideas. It's like that wonderful film, Rosemary's Baby, which is the best horror film I've ever seen. I've had hundreds of people all over the world describe that baby to me in graphic detail. Its slanted eyes, its clawed talons, for hands, its tail, its hooves. You never saw it, of course. Never. It's what you don't see rather than what you do see. Leave it to the imagination of the audience.
Yes.
Lon Chaney said that to Boris Karloff. Boris Karloff said it to me. I said it to other people, although I think I'm pretty well the end of the line here. And I haven't done a picture of that kind, actually, since 1971, which is 16 years ago.
No.
If you ask me who's the greatest actress I've ever worked
Well,
with,
yes.
that's an easy one. Betty Davis.
Really?
Oh, yes. I mean,
very
by a mile.
imperious,
What a
isn't she?
wonderful woman.
Yes.
Tremendous integrity as a person and
Was
as
she
an actress.
unselfish as an actress, or did she
Wonderful
rather
to
want it all
me.
set up?
Absolutely
Was she?
wonderful to me, yes. I couldn't have had a more thrilling time. Made a picture for Walt Disney, all about children who could levitate people.
Oh, yeah.
And I was levitated about 40 feet into the air on a very thin wire above the floor of a power station. You can have rather
Well, that's not much
weird
fun.
things happen to you in this business. The first picture I did after I went to Los Angeles to live in 75 was a thing called Airport 77, I think it was. And I spent 3 days 30 feet underwater drowning with a lead belt round my waist. And when they take away the thing you can see through and they take away the thing you can breathe through, you're on your own, you can't see anything, and you have to close your throat because no bubbles must come out, otherwise it's a living actor. So I spent 3 days doing that, as a result of which I was made a member of the American Stuntmen's Association, and I think I probably earned that more than anything else.
One other thing I endeared you to me, not just the fact you love cricket, but I read somewhere that you like, your favourite dishes are roly-poly pudding and spotted dick.
Oh, I adore them, both.
So, I mean, are you a great English food
Yes.
chap? You see, I am.
Almost a food freak, because I happen to think that we have some of the best food, I choose my words carefully, some of the best food in the world. I can't say that we have some of the best cooking, which is rather a different thing. But I don't think anything in the world can beat a really good English meal, really well cooked. I mean, roast lamb, roast beef, you name it, anything along those lines.
But nowadays they always put additives to them and put all sorts of things, different tasting. So you want it pure.
I don't eat, unfortunately, although I have a passion for it. I don't eat roly-poly pudding and spotted dick baked jam roll. Although the other day I had some suet pudding in a restaurant. I very bravely said, oh, just bring what you like, you know. So I had 3 mountains piled on my plate with treacle all over them. I only got through the first one,
did you?
I'm afraid.
Or bread and butter pudding.
Like a stone. Can you remember when you were young, first started watching cricket, bowlers taking these immensely long runs?
No. Well, I think I saw Gregory.
Well, I never saw him.
I saw Gregory in 1926, which is dreadful. I saw him at Cheltenham. And he seemed to have a pretty long run. And then there was, who was the chap who bowled all the no balls when he came over for Australia? Not Tim Wall. McCormick.
Oh, well, Ernie McCormick was very, very fast.
Ernie, and he had a long run too.
Very, very fast. I remember watching him bowl. He was, but the fastest bowler I ever saw, and I actually saw him in Australia when I was a boy, was Eddie Gilbert.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Who took about 5 steps, and you never saw the ball at all.
No, exactly.
But he was almost a round-arm bowler. He slung it.
Yes, he must have been a terror. You heard the voice in the background. Did you ever see him play, Tom Graveney?
Oh, many times, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Many, many times. Very good golfer, too.
Yes, well,
Yes.
because that's
County cricketers.
That is your other thing besides roly-poly golf.
I think you used to be 1 or 2, if not better.
I got down to 1.
You got down to 1. Well, what did you get down to?
I got down to 1 less than that.
Did you?
Yes, but
I said,
not
we
anymore.
ought to get up and
Not anymore. No, please. I don't think I could with my back.
So who's the best? Who's the best player you've played with in golf? Have you played with the greats?
I've been very lucky. After living in America for 10 years, I have played with just about all of them. The only one I haven't played with is Ben Hogan, which is impossible. I mean, you just don't get a game with Ben Hogan. He plays with his friends at Shady Oaks, Fort Worth in Texas, and that's it. But I played with Snead and I played with Nelson. I had an incredible experience once in a tournament as the only amateur. They played in 3s, 1 amateur and 2 professionals, and they were playing for an awful lot of money. So if you put it in the rough, they weren't going to come in and help you look. And the very first day I played with Lee Trevino and Craig Stadler, and the second day with Johnny Miller and Gary Player, the third day with Jerry Pate and Sevi Ballesteros, and the 4th day with Greg Norman and Jack Nicklaus.
These are a few names you're dropping.
Well, I'm just casting casually, aside. But the reason I'm saying that is you can just imagine the state of near paralysis I got into with something like 20,000 people on the golf course. I'd never played, although I'd played in the amateur championship a couple of times, the English amateur. I'd never played with people lining the course from the tee to the green.
Yeah, but it does save the slice going into the wood, doesn't it? Because it bounces against the crowd.
Well, I'm more of a hooker than a slicer. Yes.
And you also tell me you played with Richie once, Richie Bennett.
I did indeed. I played with Richie, both in Australia, at the Australian, which was revamped by Jack Nicklaus, a few years ago when I was filming out there, and he took me around the course, which was a very, very tough course indeed. And before that, the first time I ever played with him was in one of these BBC Pro Celebrity things. It was at Glen Eagles, and in those days there were 2 amateurs, there still are for that matter, and 2 pros. The amateurs changed from match to match, the pros remained the same. We had Seve Ballesteros and Lee Trevino, and I think I was playing with Seve and Richie was playing with Lee Trevino. And as we walked down the first fairway, which is amazing to relate, both Bonneau and I hit off the tee, which in itself is remarkable. As we walked down, I said, we must try and enjoy this, mustn't we? Because it's pretty unnerving. And he said to me, unnerving? This is worse, far worse than going out to try and save the Ashes.
Well, I could listen to Johners and Sir Christopher Lee chatting all day.